Hello friends, in my last lecture I have discussed the various types of quantifiers, that is universal quantifier, existential quantifier and uniqueness quantifier. So in this particular video I will discuss the negation of those quantifiers, how the negation is done and what value is obtained by negating those quantifiers. And before discussing that, let's discuss what are the quantifiers. Universal quantifier, this is the symbol for all x, for every x, for any x and for each x. And existential quantifier, this is the symbol for existential quantifier which says for some x, or we can say for at least one x from the universe of discourse. And uniqueness quantifier, this is the symbol for uniqueness quantifier that we have already discussed, and it says for one and only one x, or for exactly one x, the px can be true or false. And two more important points that we have to discuss is, for this particular example, the value of universal quantifier is true, and let's analyze this. For any particular predicate, if the value of universal quantifier is true, then definitely the value of existential quantifier for that predicate will be true. So why it is happening so? Because universal quantifier says for all the values of x, this particular predicate will be true. So for if any predicate is true for all the values of x, then definitely it will be true for some values of x. So universal quantifier says for all x, for every x, the predicate is true. So if it is the case, then definitely for existential quantifier, for some x, for at least one x, this will definitely hold true. And second case is, if the value of existential quantifier is false for any particular predicate, then definitely the value of uniqueness quantifier cannot be true for that particular predicate. And why it is happening so? Because here we are saying that the value of existential quantifier is false. So that means there is not even a single x for which this particular predicate is true. So if this is the case, then definitely there cannot be exactly one x for which this particular predicate can be true. So we can analyze or realize or remember these two properties. If for any predicate the value of universal quantifier is true, then definitely for that particular predicate the value of existential quantifier will definitely be true. And if for any predicate the value of existential quantifier is false, then definitely for that particular predicate the value of uniqueness quantifier will be false also. Okay, now let's move on to the negation of quantifiers. So we have discussed three types of quantifiers, but in the case of negation we will discuss only two types of quantifiers. We will talk about the negation of universal quantifier, as well as we will talk about the negation of existential quantifier. So what is the meaning of negation? So negation is a logical connective which returns us the reverse value of the existing truth value. So in all our examples we will assume that the given predicate is true always. So we will try to check, we will try to understand what will happen if we do the negation, or indirectly we can say when will be the value of the universal quantifier will be false. Okay, so if this is the universal quantifier, this is the notation for universal quantifier which says for all x, for every x, px is true. So how to denote its negation? So its negation will simply be denoted by just adding a negation symbol in the front of this particular notation. And let's try to understand how the negation of any universal quantifier is obtained. So let px be any predicate which says x has mobile phone, and the universe of discourse for this particular predicate is students of MCA first year. And if I want to denote this particular notation for all x px is true, that means every student of MCA first year has mobile phone. So the keyword every here denotes that we are talking about the universal quantifier, we are talking about all students of the particular class. Now if we assume that this particular statement is true, or we can say if we assume that for all x px is true, then its negation will tell us when the above statement will be false. So that means negation of universal quantifier or negation of this statement will tell us when will this particular statement become false. So how it can happen? So let's try to understand. So if any student in the class do not have mobile phone. Now what we are saying, every student of MCA first year has mobile phone. So let's suppose there are 40 students in class and all the 40 students must have mobile phone for this particular statement to be true. Now to make it false, even if a single student do not have mobile phones, that means 39 students have mobile phone and 1 student do not have mobile phone, then we cannot say that every student has mobile phone. So what is the overall conclusion? If out of all possible x values, if only one value is not satisfying the predicate, then the overall universal quantifier become false. So that would be enough to make the value of for all x px value false. So indirectly what we can say, the negation of universal quantifier is equivalent to for some x negation of px. Now how to read this? Here we are saying that every student has mobile phone and this is the negation. Now we are doing the negation of this particular statement, this particular notation. So it is saying that for some x px is not true. So what is the meaning? Some students in the class do not have mobile phone, and we know that some can already be replaced by at least one x. So in the entire class, if at least one student is there who is not having mobile phone, then definitely it will be the negation of the original sentence. It will be the negation of this particular statement. So there, if there exists at least one x from the universe of discourse for which px is not true, then we can definitely say that this particular statement is false, or we can say that it is the negation of this particular notation. So this is how the negation of universal quantifier is done, and let's move on to the negation of existential quantifier. So existential quantifier that we have already discussed is represented by for some x px is true, and if we want to do its negation, similar, we will add a negation symbol in the front of this particular notation. So if we add a tilde symbol in the front of this particular notation, then it will become the negation for this particular notation. Now let's try to understand with the help of an example. Let px be any predicate which says x is honest, and universe of discourse here is the set of politicians. So all politicians are the universe of discourse here, and what this particular notation says, some politicians are honest, because we have used existential quantifier here. So it says for some x px is true, that means some politicians are honest. Now if we assume that this particular notation is true, that means if this particular sentence is true, then its negation will tell us when this particular sentence will be false. So after doing its negation, we will get when this particular sentence will be not true. So how it is done? So we are saying that some politicians are honest, and we already know that some can be replaced by at least one. So out of all possible politicians, at least one politician is there which is honest, and we are saying that this particular statement is true. So when this particular sentence will be false, when none of the politician will be honest, because we are saying from the set of all politicians there exists at least one politician which is honest. So to make this sentence false, we have to make all the politicians not honest. So it will be false in only one case, when all the politicians from the set of universe of discourse will not be honest. So indirectly, if I am doing its negation, it will return us this particular notation. So how to read this? So this is the statement for some x px is true, that means some politicians are honest, and if I do its negation, then it is returning us for all x and not of px. So how to read this? So negation of some politicians are honest will be for all x px is not true, that means all politicians are not honest. So if all politicians are not honest, that means from the entire set of universe of discourse, none of the politician is honest. So for all x px is not true, or we can say px is false for every x. So this is how to read this particular notation, and it indirectly means none of the politician from the entire set is honest. So we can indirectly remember this particular thing by, if we want to do the negation of any quantifier, simply the sign changes. Here from the existential quantifier, we have universal quantifier, and a negation symbol is added in the front of the predicate. And similarly, if we look at this particular notation, if we want to do the negation of universal quantifier, the universal quantifier is changed to existential quantifier, and a negation symbol is added in the front of the predicate logic. So this is how the negation of existential quantifier and the universal quantifier is obtained. So overall conclusion is we have to do the negation of universal quantifier and existential quantifier. So by default we always assume that this particular notation is true. So when it is true, if the px, the predicate, is true for every x from the set of discords. So when it will become false, this will give us the negation. So it will be false when from the entire set of universe of discords, if we find even a single x which will be not true for the given predicate. And what about existential quantifier? It says for some x px is true, and it says there is at least one x for which px is true. So to make it false, what we have to do, from the entire set, if it is not true for even a single x, then it becomes false for the existential quantifier. So this is all about negation of quantifiers. In the next lecture I will discuss about free and bound variables, and also I will discuss the orders of quantifiers. Thank you.